Hi there folks, sunny here today but a bit windy, but I have to get going and start working on the currant bushes we have here. So it's time to do the spring pruning and also the propagation. So let me take you along for that. Those are two of our oldest red currant bushes, and I noticed yesterday that they also started developing. You can see the tip buds here and on other branches starting to open. The little tiny red tip here are the leaves. So I have to get some cuttings for propagation and also to generally shape the bushes, even though they are still at young age, maybe 4 years old. I try to do the spring pruning every year regardless, to not only help shape the bushes but to get a constant supply of cuttings for rooting, because that's one of the things I really appreciate in growing small fruit. In the case with those two fruit bushes, those are red currants. They have been fruiting for 3 years now, and they've been planted here 2 years ago. And you can see that the oldest stems are thicker and branched out, and they also have cut tips in several places where I did my yearly pruning. And all those lighter colored straight stems are the last year's new growth, new roots that develop from new shoots that develop from the root crown buds. So if I let them grow, they will grow upwards and eventually start to branch out, but I want them to start branching out lower, so the bush becomes wider and easier for picking by the kids, and also not get too crowded, too bushy. So usually the stems which are growing inwards, I'm removing from the bottom as low as I can cut them. And this here cutting, it has 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 buds on it, and I can easily separate that into 3 cuttings, and then that will make 3 new red currant plants. Those shoots which are growing in a good direction, I'm just shortening so that they end up on a outwards facing bud, like this one, cut slanting away from the bud. And this cutting can also be separated into 2, or I can stick it in the soil deeper, so it will go better roots. And this simple procedure I try to do on all the currant bushes. So removing those stems now may lower the yield for the coming year, not this one but the next one. So by doing those cuts, I'm losing some of the potential yield for next year, because this year this branch will develop fruit buds which will give fruit next year, but cutting it will probably just grow sideways branches. So I'm delaying the yield by 1 year, but at the same time I'm getting lots of new plants for the future. So if you look longer term, it certainly pays off to do this trimming, because with time you get more and more plants, and in the worst case scenario you're just losing, you're not actually losing it, but you are delaying the yield for 1 year. I'm trying to cut so that the plants will spread out, and I'm shortening most of those 1 year growth. And you can see that even from those two tiny bushes I get enough cuttings for maybe 20 or more new currants. Okay, so we're down here by my fruit bushes propagation area, and you can see previous years rooted and growing red currants, and it's honeyberries over there and black currants. The easiest way to propagate the currant is to just stick the cuttings in the ground, 2 or 3 buds preferably going in the soil, and 2 or 3 buds with the terminal bud preferably sticking outside of the soil. And you can see here a good demonstration of a 2-year-old cutting. Those were not fertilized in any way, not really weeded. Most of the ground cover here is a mix of wild strawberries and couch grass. They do get a weekly dose of water by our drip irrigation, but that's about it. And you can see here, for example, this was the cutting which I stuck in the ground 2 years ago, and then on the first year those 2 buds developed and grew up to here, and they set fruit buds. On the second year they did a lower amount of growth because they were using their energy to produce fruit. If I wanted to accelerate the growth, I should have trimmed those and removed the fruit bud clusters, but as those plants are mostly for gifts or for sale, I want the people to be able to have the fruit on the very first year which they're getting the plant. And also on the second year this plant concentrated in growing a new root shoot. This one here didn't grow a new root shoot, but I trimmed one of the tips and it branched out nicely, and those are all fruiting buds. This one grew 2 new shoots, but that's because the tip was broken off, probably died in winter, and I removed it. And this one here, you can see that it has a vigorous new shoot and lots of branching here because of the original cutting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 buds developed and grew nicely. Now you don't absolutely need to trim your currants or the other fruit bushes. I find it useful in my context because propagation is secondary yield next to the fruit yield. So you can see that this is my older blackcurrant plant, which doesn't look much bigger. It's about 1 meter high in height, but I've taken many cuttings out of it, and I will continue to do so right now by removing those growths which are last year's shoots, just to keep it more compact and to have it as a source of new plants. And those are the black currants, which are 1 year younger. On the first year they were just a cutting in the soil, and they rooted and they grew, and I spaced them out more evenly. And now they grew, and then they grew a second year, which is this growth here, the lighter colored stems. And now they're starting their 3rd year of development, and they already have several fruit buds on them. So I moved to the side here, to this patch of bare soil, so I can demonstrate something about the spacing of the cuttings. Because the cuttings in the first year, they don't grow very large roots, and not all of them will take, some of them just won't. So even if you don't have a large space, you can still grow and propagate dozens of currant cuttings, and you can basically just stick 3 buds every few centimeters. I usually do a couple rows or 3 rows and then the drip line, or maybe if you have a drip line going that way, you can do 2 rows on each side. But because our soil is high clay content, so if the drip line runs here, it can easily irrigate 2 or 3 rows down because it has a very nice absorption. Still, you can I'll be pulling those out later. but I just wanted to demonstrate. So doing this simple grid of less than 10 centimeters apart is enough space for those cuttings to grow. All of the plants which you saw previously in the video, the large bushes which I did the pruning on, all those started in this manner 3 or 4 years ago, and on a very small space of 20 by 20 centimeters you can easily start maybe 2 dozen cuttings, so you can easily ramp up your fruit bush production without the need to have much space. You can also easily do that in a bucket if, for example, you're not visiting your garden daily, as we were weekend gardeners for several years. You can take those home, stick them in a pot or in a bucket of soil, keep them in a shaded location with constant moisture in the soil, and then next year you'll be ready to plant them out. And finally, I wanted to show you the 2 golden currant plants, Rubus aureum. They give black fruit, but they called golden because their flowers are in bright yellow color. And you can see that this plant, I have featured it before in a video, and you'll see it more developing this spring. It already has some buds leafed out, and I really like that it grows in a very compact clumps and very upward very upward growing habit. So I want to make a short hedge out of it, which will not only flower beautifully but also give nice fruit. So I want to trim those heavily and start more cuttings so I can propagate them. They are also easy to propagate, as all of the currants are, and you can see this tiny root sucker here. Those plants which I have, they all started like that only 3 years ago. So from a single stem, from a single root, I grew those 2 plants, which are now over 1 meter high, and also this one, which has multiple new shoots, multiple stems, multiple fruit buds, and it's almost 1.50 meters tall by now. And finally, at the end of this video, I wanted to show you something interesting. You know that I'm a fan of random experiments, and this one here happened rather unexpectedly, because late last spring, when the development of the bushes was more on the way, I stuck several black currant cuttings here in the soil, and then because I wanted to see if they can grow with only few buds above ground, preferably 1 or 2 buds, I forgot totally about them because they were very short nubs sticking out, and I piled this mass of weeded grass here on top, so they didn't start developing well into late June, and I didn't think that they will survive the winter. But now, when I was shooting the video, I saw that they have buds that are now starting to green up. So, using the occasion, I'll just do a quick dig here with the digging fork to show you how those very small cuttings, in certainly under optimal conditions, develop. And then I'll have to be planting them out, spacing them out so they can grow better. But that will probably be a task for tomorrow. Just a simple dig under, and you can see that they're coming out. Here is the root structure of the cutting. You can see that it's nicely developed, even though it's tiny. I had 2 or 3 buds under the soil, and those 2 side buds they died, but the tip bud developed and grew just a very tiny bit, maybe 3 centimeters, but the roots grew nicely. So this one, planted out in good conditions, it will grow easily half a meter this year. So you can see that even in those adverse conditions, currant can easily root on a palm size space. I have 3, 6, 8, 9 cuttings growing nicely. So that was all for today, folks. I'm off to plant all those cuttings, and I'll see you in the next one.